Long before he was a spooky character in Gothic novels, Spring-Heeled Jack was a very, very real public safety crisis. Seriously, just imagine for a second. An entire city, London, completely paralyzed by fear of a figure who could leap over 10-foot walls and literally breathe fire. This isn't just a ghost story. This is the true story of how a series of violent attacks spiraled into one of the most enduring urban legends in history. Just listen to this. That's from the sworn testimony of Jane Elsop, a young woman who was brutally attacked right on her own doorstep. This one, absolutely bizarre quote, tells you everything you need to know about how strange this threat was. She isn't describing a regular criminal. No way. It sounds like she's describing something from another world. And that, right there, is the central mystery we're diving into. What was Spring-Heeled Jack? Was he some kind of supernatural demon? A madman with just unbelievable athletic ability? Or was he something else entirely? Something new for the industrial age? A technological menace? So let's dig into the evidence together. Okay, Section 1, A Leap from the Shadows. We're starting in 1837. Picture the fog-choked, gaslit streets of Victorian London. It's a city right on the cusp of a new era, but it's still absolutely shrouded in ancient fears. And this is where the panic first really took hold. You know, it all started with just whispers. A businessman sees some figure just effortlessly clear a cemetery wall. But then, those whispers turn to screams. A servant girl, Mary Stevens, is viciously assaulted by a figure with cold metallic claws that rip at her clothes. When help finally arrives, he escapes by scaling a 9-foot wall in a single bound. The physicality of it all is so important here. This wasn't some ghost. This was a violent physical predator with an absolutely impossible ability. So, Section 2, Anatomy of a Monster. What did this thing actually look like? Well, as the attacks started to pile up, a really consistent and frankly terrifying profile began to emerge from the witness accounts. Let's just break this down. Witnesses kept reporting glowing red eyes that could pierce right through the London smog, a devilish face with pointed ears, and those cold metallic claws that could tear through clothing. Underneath a big, dark cloak, they saw this strange, tight-fitting suit that shimmered almost like it was made of oilskin or silver. And, of course, the most bizarre feature of all, the ability to breathe blue and white flames. Yeah, this wasn't just some guy in a mask. This was a meticulously crafted character designed for maximum terror. So you can see how this description created this deep conflict in the Victorian mind. On one hand, you had all the traits of a demon straight out of a horror story, the fire breath, the devil face. But on the other hand, you had these elements that felt distinctly man-made, industrial. The metal claws, the oilskin suit, those rumored spring boots. Was this an ancient evil or a terrifying new product of the machine age? But how did he pull off those impossible leaps? Well, the most popular theory wasn't supernatural at all. It was technological. People really believed he wore specialized boots packed with high-tension springs, almost like a primitive exoskeleton. And in an era obsessed with steam power and clockwork gadgets, this made a terrifying kind of sense. It grounded the monster in the real world, which you could argue made him even more frightening. All right, Section 3, A City Consumed by Fear. Now we're going to see how a few isolated attacks ignited a full-blown, citywide hysteria. Because the monster wasn't just built from springs and oilskin. He was also built out of newspaper headlines and pure, uncut fear. The first few months of 1838 were an absolute frenzy. It really kicks off when London's Lord Mayor publicly acknowledges the threat, which, accidentally gives the whole legend an official seal of approval. The press, especially those cheap, sensational comics called penny dreadfuls, goes into overdrive. They're the ones who standardize the name Spring-Heeled Jack, and a media feedback loop just explodes. Then you get the most infamous attacks on Jane Alsop and Lucy Scales, confirming a terrifying spree. The city panics, and armed mobs start patrolling the streets, often attacking innocent people they mistake for Jack in the fog. It was chaos. Okay, Section 4, Hunting the Phantom. With the entire city in an uproar, the pressure was on the newly formed police force to catch this guy, and the hunt zeroed in on one very unusual suspect. So the prime suspect was this guy Henry de la Poa Beresford, but everybody knew him as the Mad Marquis of Waterford. The circumstantial evidence, you have to admit, was pretty compelling. He was a rich, athletic nobleman, famous for his violent pranks and just total contempt for authority. The public loved the idea of a depraved aristocrat hunting the poor for sport. But the theory has some major holes. He often had solid alibis during the attacks, and sightings of Jack kept happening for decades after the Marquis settled down, and even long after he died in 1859. And this, right here, just brilliantly illustrates the complete failure of the investigation. Despite all the panic, the armed patrols, the suspects, the number of people who were ever successfully convicted for a Spring-Heeled Jack attack was exactly 0. A guy named Thomas Milbank was arrested, sure, but Jane Elsop couldn't identify him, and he was acquitted. The Phantom was never caught. All right, Section 5, the legend evolves. So the initial panic in London did eventually die down, but Jack was far from gone. The legend simply evolved, adapting his methods and his targets over the next 70 years. Watching the legend evolve is just fascinating. In the 1830s, he's an urban predator who attacks vulnerable women. 40 years later, he pops up at a military camp, slapping armed soldiers and dodging bullets, basically mocking the might of the British Empire. Then, by 1904, he's up in industrial Liverpool, a rooftop runner leaping between tenement buildings. The legend was incredibly adaptable. It just changed its hunting grounds to reflect whatever people were anxious about at the time. And as the real-life attacks faded into memory, an even more dramatic transformation happened in pop culture. Let's be clear, the historical Jack was a terrifying criminal who preyed on women. But in the Penny Dreadfuls, he was completely reimagined as an anti-hero, a wronged aristocrat using his gadgets to fight for the little guy. This totally sanitized the trauma of the real victims and turned a real-world monster into a fictional, swashbuckling character, an early blueprint for the modern superhero. Okay, our final section, Jack's lasting legacy. So why are we still talking about this guy today? Because, believe it or not, Spring-Heeled Jack left a permanent mark, a legacy that connects directly to our modern world in some pretty surprising ways. His legacy is really threefold. First off, the panic led to actual changes in urban design. London expanded its gas lamp network to get rid of the dark corners where Jack could hide. Second, his whole vibe, that mix of 19th century style and bizarre tech, makes him a founding father of the steampunk genre. And third, think about it. A costumed figure with gadgets, a secret identity, and a flair for jumping across rooftops, that is the basic DNA of characters like Batman. Jack was the first to take that leap from villain to vigilante archetype. Spring-Heeled Jack was a monster born from Victorian fears. Fear of the dark, of new technology, of social chaos. And it really leaves us with a final question, doesn't it? What are our deepest anxieties today? And what kinds of monsters are they creating right now, in the shadows of our own world?